Hello, shalom, welcome, dear brothers and sisters in Mashiach. Tonight's presentation is actually recorded for those who would like to tune in at a later time. Normally, Sister Yusana, who is on the call with me and Brother Shem and the others, actually, Sister Yusana has already, I've had my beautiful connection with her earlier on, and we were just she was just such an encouragement to my spirit. And she's already prayed in opening of this presentation, only it's offline. But, and I was contemplating whether or not I should do this presentation, but decided that I have so much energy, and I want to just go on with the promise to overcomers, which is the last promise that we are looking at in the book of Revelation. And just want to make further connections because, as you know, if you've been tracking with us, we are down to the promise to the overcomers, where Revelation 2:7 says, "To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of Yahuah." And, this is part B. I don't know if there'll be part C or D, but there is so much to unpack here. So, like I've said in the past, would like to take our time because there's so much treasure in unpacking this truth. Now, as you know, Revelation, a lot of the revelation is the details in this book is based upon the Tanakh, the Old Testament. And as you know, as you've been tracking, I have sort of tied back all of these promise to the overcomers in the 7 assemblies that Yahushua spoke to and addressed. And I've been tying it back to the Genesis, to the creation core story. And it's going to be the same thing with this one, So again, if we sort of, just a quick recap, we did touch on neurogenesis in the last presentation. And I just find so much, parallel when it comes to, the story of Adam and Eve, the story of creation, and how it is tied to a scientific term called neurogenesis. And ever wonder why science terms this as Genesis? And ever ask the question why the first book of the Bible is Genesis? It's like, there's these overlapping terminology that's used in science as well as the books of the Bible. And I guess this is why it really does pique my interest. But once again, let's define neurogenesis. Really, it's just as a simple for this purpose. Just want to simplify it. Really, is the process by which new neurons. See, another way you can look at neurons, what they are messages or transmission. And this process is formed. This new neurons are formed in the brain. This is what neurogenesis is about. And I look at the brain, and I showed a little bit of embryology, the process of embryology in the last upload. And it may not be clear to you, and I may not have been able to really explain it in detail in a way that resonated, but I see it. I see in the picture of embryology, in the neural plate and in the neural tube, on that ectoderm process. There's this, just before the brain forms, is this enclosure that takes place. And in that, I I think of the garden. The garden in Hebrew is enclosure. And this is where Adam was placed. So it's the same thing in this neurogenesis, you know, this messenger or the neuron formed in this enclosure or the brain. And this happens obviously in embryonic development. And we see that Adam, or the single cell, how it divides into two and then into four, and then it continues to divide. And you see that this process continues throughout all the brain regions and also throughout a lifespan of mankind, right? So the cell multiplication that takes place, like when typically an adult um, man or human being has trillions, 50 to 75 trillions of cells in our bodies. And you know what, when I see that, I look at Yahusha. You know, I was a little bit, I couldn't remember where to refer to in the scripture and what I was talking about, what was related to this point that I'm going to say. But if you look at 1 Corinthians 12, chapter 12, verse 12, this is what I see. For as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Mashiach. You know, and if you go back down here, verse 14, it says, for in fact, the body is not one member, but many. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? You know, and it's like the whole point here is in our bodies, this is true of science too, right? Like biology. We are everything, every organs, every part of our body is a result of multiplication of from a single cell. Think about that, right? And so the single cell that split into two, think of Adam and Eve, and then split into four, think of Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve. And then eventually it kept multiplying and multiplying. And this is my point. This is what I see. And it really is a, you know, the scripture says that his Yahusha is the body and he's the head. And in that body, there are many members, right? So just like our bodies have different members of organs, right? So, you know, there's cells that based on the DNA instructions, they form into a heart, right? All of the cells got together and they became heart, they became lungs, they became kidneys, pancreas, right? So, you know, it is a beautiful picture. And we're going to further dig into this. And this is what I was trying to express in the last upload. Now, if you look at Adam, he is the first Melchizedek, which means he had an office, a purpose, and Yahuah had a purpose for him. Melchizedek is basically the priest of the Most High Yahuah. So when you are a priest, you are an ambassador, or you are representing someone. So Adam, as the first Melchizedek, he was a messenger to who? To the rest, right? And as you know, my position, and I presented to you, and I've provided, I think I've referred to the links, you see uploads, that there are two separate creations. So Adam was set apart, so he can be the Melchizedek, the messenger to the other. And I call them the day six people. Anyway, and what I was trying to express last presentation was, if you look at a neuron, right? Ever wonder why the scripture likens mankind to a tree? You know, there's several scripture references that refers to mankind as trees. So if you look at a neuron, right? This is what a neuron looks like, right? I'm going to play this video because it shows, I think this guy does a better job at explaining, but I'll pause and I'll go back and show you what I mean why I see a neuron, as I mentioned in the last video, as a type of Adam, okay? A type of man.
Explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less. In this installment, I will discuss the neuron. This is a brain. Estimates vary, but right now the best guess seems to be that our brains contain around 85 billion neurons. The neuron is a nerve cell, and it's the primary functional unit of the nervous system. This is a generic image of a neuron. Neurons actually come in all shapes and sizes, but this is the prototypical version of a neuron that you'll often see in a textbook. The structures extending from the left side of the neuron that look a little bit like tree branches are called dendrites. Dendrites are the area where neurons receive most of their information. There are receptors on dendrites that are designed to pick up signals from other neurons that come in the form of chemicals called neurotransmitters. Those signals picked up by dendrites cause electrical changes in a neuron that are interpreted in an area called the soma, or the cell body. The soma contains the nucleus, which contains the DNA, or genetic material of the cell. The soma takes all the information from the dendrites and puts it together in an area called the axon hillock. If the signal coming from the dendrites is strong enough, then a signal is sent to the next part of the neuron, which is called the axon. At this point, the signal is called an action potential. The action potential travels down the axon, which is covered with myelin, an insulatory material that helps to prevent the signal from degrading. The last step for the action potential is the axon terminals, also known as synaptic buttons. When the signal reaches the axon terminals, it can cause the release of neurotransmitter. These purple structures represent the dendrites of another neuron. When a neurotransmitter is released from axon terminals, it interacts with receptors on the dendrites of the next neuron, and then the process repeats with the next neuron.
Okay, so I want to just pause this video for a second, okay? And you're asking, why do I see neuron as a type of man? Okay, I want to show you something here, and it's also going to touch on the makeup of man, which is, we know we have a spirit, body, and soul, all right? So dendrites, and I've done uploads and presentation on dendrites in the past, but really to simplify, these dendrites are actually made up of our memories. Okay, so these dendrites, they change all the time. You know, every time you learn, every time you unlearn, it changes the structure of the dendrite. So this dendrite really, if you understand that the soul of man is made up of intellect, free will, made up of emotions, and so emotions, free will, intellect, desire, right? So this really makes up a soul of a man. And all of those things that I just mentioned is we start getting this built pre-conception in our mother's womb, right? So memory has, started to form in us from when we were a young child, right? And so the older we get, the more dendrites we end up developing, okay? And this is why I call this sort of like the soul, right? So this soul here, right, as you can see, it all kind of is attached to what's called the soma, which is the cell body. Interesting, right? And so if you look at it, the brain itself is made up, like the video says, is made up of 85 billion neurons. So basically, this entire process, what I'm going to explain, or what the video explained, makes up what animates our body. Think about it, right? So from a physical perspective and an emotional perspective, our body, soul, this whole process is what is what gives animation to our body, right? In a simplified manner. So in the soma, so you can see that the dendrites, the guy explained that the wave of information or neurotransmitters that comes in, right, through our brain. So these are the 5 senses. So in other words, this is the input from the environment that comes in like a wind. So it comes in, and then it actually it touches the tip of these dendrites, right? So whatever it is that we experience on the external, these dendrites are designed to be stirred up. And that's how, you process the information, the memory. That's how your decision is actually based on this very interaction. But anyway, the dendrite attached to the body, moved by the neurotransmitters, right? It goes through nucleus. As you can see in the middle is a nucleus. What's in the nucleus? Basically, chromosomes, right? And so our DNA, and our DNA is made up of chromosomes, right? So as you know, a DNA has the instruction of life. So so again, the dendrites represent the soul, the soma, or the cell body, right, is the body. And then the nucleus, because it has the DNA instruction embedded in it, it is the spirit of man. This is where intuition, this is where consciousness, and this is where worship is housed, in the spirit of man, right? So now this beautiful picture for a second. Once the new neurotransmitters touch the tips of these dendrites, it basically works with our soma, right? And it goes through this nucleus, this conscience that we have, this intuition that we have, right? And through that, we actually make our possibility of choices. You see that? So this little thing here, it's called the axon. You mentioned, the guy mentioned that these are also called action potentials. You see that? Action potential. So you can see from looking at a neuron that based on the memories that have been put in us from childhood, and as well as the external signals that we get, and these in this manner they're called neurotransmitters, right? It touches our self, our body, and it goes through our spirit man, because in our spirit man we have a thing called conscience. We just know what is right and wrong because Yahuah put that in our spirit, right? And so based on this, we create a number of possibilities of action potentials. And guess what? This is such a beautiful picture. This word myelin, I will show you what myelin is. Okay? Myelin is a sheath. Myelin sheath is a protective covering that surrounds fibers called axons. These long, thin projections that extend from the main body of the nerve cell or neuron, like this. The main function of myelin is to protect and insulate these axons and enhance their transmission of electrical impulses. And myelination begins before birth, but is not completed in the frontal cortex until late adolescence or maturity. So I don't know if you're ahead of me, but my point is, if you are in Mashiach, he is your covering, like this myelin. And this myelin protects you and it increases your transmission of the electrical impulses, right, that you're getting from the nucleus. You see that? From the spirit that Yahuah breathed upon the nostrils of mankind, made us a living soul. So look at this. This potential action, covered in this myelin, if you are in Mashiach, it works perfectly because this now gets transmitted through these nerve endings, you see. And these nerve endings releases the electrical signals. And the rest, like these nerve endings, are also connected to other dendrites. So the thing here is, you've noticed that these are action potentials. So what in the end is accomplished, or what collapses all of these probabilities into reality, into actually what the decision you end up making, is your free will, is your choice. Do you see? So Yahuah has given you everything. He has given you, and this is where we need to overcome. Because this neuron that looks like a tree, right? We are faced with our childhood memories. These are the dendrites, the way we were raised, the way we were, the foundation, the architecture of our mind, our brain. And from a day-to-day basis, we are also exposed to the five senses, the transmission that we get from the external environment. And all of this impacts our body. And so based on the internal and the external combination of input, right, there is this nucleus, this spirit of man that's inside us. And all of these combination creates action potential. So probabilities, right? And then cover that with Yahusha as a seal, as a strengthening source, right? To keep you in the know of what is right, what is of Yahuah, right? So all of these action potentials collapses into reality, or what is real, based on your choice, based on the free will of man, right? So as you can see here, this is why, this is why I see this as a type of Adam, a type of mankind. It's like I was talking last week about how Yahuah reveals himself, reveals his truth in such practical ways. And he does it in the macrocosm of things and microcosm of things. And this is this little dendrite that looks like a tree. And the scripture says that we are like trees. When we meditate upon his word day and night, we shall be like a tree planted by the river waters, and our leaves will not wither. We will bear our fruit in season. And isn't that interesting in that verse? Our leaves will not wither. And I think I touched on a little bit of that in the last presentation, but I want to go in detail this time, okay? So Yahuah is so, when he teaches us, when he reveals his word, he does so in a cycle, right? In patterns. Because we're not the smartest people. That's why he likens us to sheep. So when he does things repetitively, he knows that this is how things get embedded in our mind, right? So he and I'll show you how this works as a child. His grace and his mercy is, you will see that as well as a child. But when we pass this certain age, for us to learn things, for us to really form a habit, we have to do things repetitively. So my point is, that's why when you map these truths, these concepts, and these metaphors from the scripture, it is really one story, right? So this, I kind of touched on this last Tuesday, but like body, soul, and spirit. Why is there way, truth, and life? Why is there an outer court, holy place, holy of holies? Why is there blood, water, spirit? Why is there faith, hope, love? Why is there sound, mind, power, and love? And it seems like Yahuah is saying all of these three components, right? A three-stranded cord is not easily broken. So this is the point of it, right? If we have our body, soul, and spirit operating in the way Yahuah has designed us, where our spirit is supposed, because our spirit is what's connected to Yahuah spirit, and our spirit becomes the boss of our soul becomes the boss of our body, then we operate in love. Okay, so You see, I see that before the fall, I know the scripture, I don't believe that the scripture is even worded by, randomly. I think that when Paul says faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love in 1 Corinthians 13, I think even the order of that is very strategically put there. You see, before the fall, I believe that the order was love, hope, and faith. But since Paul wrote that post-fall, he wrote faith, hope, and love. Okay, what do I mean by that? We know that Yahuah is love. And we are made in his likeness and in his image. Then we are made from his love. So we are made out of love. And so that makes us love. So if you look at yourself and you are made in his image, you are love because Yahuah is love. And even if you look at the 1 Corinthians 13 chapter, it really starts off making a case for love. And then it continues its adjudication for love. But then the end of it, Paul says, the greatest of these is love. So really it's a love, 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 right? But then, and I'll explain why I think the order before the fall is love, hope, and faith, okay? Let's go down to the word hope. Hope says what? 1 Peter 3:15. But sanctify Yahuah Elohim in your hearts and be ready always to give an answer to every man who asketh you a reason for the hope that is in you. Faith. Faith, the word faith, 1 John 5:4. For whatever is born of Yahuah overcomes the world, and this is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith. So before the fall, Adam and Eve was in the very presence of love. They were made of love. They were in love. And the love, the purpose of them starting off in love is so that they would sanctify Yahuah, their creator, in their hearts. And so that when they are sent, they are the Melchizedek, right? When they are sent to the day 6 people, they will be ready to give an answer to every man who asks a reason for the hope that is in them. And then love, hope, and faith. Because of the faith, the strong conviction that they are demonstrating to the day 6 people, because they are born of Yahuah, they are overcomers of the world. And this is the victory that overcomes the world. What is it? The faith, right? But then Paul writes after the fall, faith, hope, and love. What does that mean? That means now, because Jeremiah says we have inherited nothing but lies, because of the fall, our consciousness with Yahuah has dramatically reduced. We've been disconnected, our soul, our body. Only through the redeeming power of Yahusha are we going to be able to connect back again into relationship with Yahuah's spirit, right? So now the opposite has to take place. It is through faith, through Yahusha, that we enter the way, and then through that you gain hope, you gain expectation. How do you gain expectation? Through Yahuah's truth. So Yahusha is the way, he is the truth. And when you when you enter through, your journey of getting back to Yahuah through faith in Yahusha, you gain hope. You create expectation with the truth. And the result of that is oneness, love. The result of that is life, eternal, abundance. So this is where I was coming from. Now, in 1 Corinthians 13:11, there is a snippet there. Verse 11 says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, and I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Okay? So there is something subtle there. What's happening is Paul is trying to say, listen, there is a progression that needs to take place, right? For you to really understand what he's talking about, faith, hope, and love, there needs to be a maturity, right? Remember, just like myelin, Yahusha, myelin, a type of Yahusha, I guess if you want to call it in the science, typology that I'm trying to connect, myelination is to be completed until maturity. You see that? So there is this maturity that needs to take place. And this is why Paul is saying, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. But then when I became a man, I put away childish things. Okay, why? And this is where now we're going into continuation of the story of Adam and Eve, right? So I propose to you that Adam and Eve are like little children. Okay, they may not have had children, physical bodies, but their mental capacity, their brain capacity can be compared to that of children. So why do I say that? If you look at Isaiah, it gives us a little bit of glimpse as to what it's like in that kingdom of heaven on earth, which is the garden. Isaiah 11:6 says, "The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little child shall lead them." What was created after when Yahuah says, well, Adam needs a helpmeet. I shall create a helpmeet to him. And he creates the beast of the earth from the animals, from the garden, right? So, and just picture Adam leading them. I don't know, just picture this, think about it. In Isaiah 65:17-20, again, the context here is the new heaven and earth, right? It says there, if you read it, people at 100 is not considered old. Only the accursed will die at 100 years old. Read it for yourself. Go to Isaiah 65 and just read it carefully. And so it's basically saying that, you know what, in the kingdom to come, or back in the Garden of Eden, if a 100-year-old were to die, that's considered young. And so, I made this connection a while ago, and this is just me, but I believe that when Adam spiritually died, when he lost his connection and he was evicted out of Eden, he was 100 years old. Why do I say that? Because Adam, I see him also as a type of Abraham. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, the son of the promise. And I believe that, again mentioned, when Eve conceived Cain and Abel, Adam was at about 100 years old. Why do I say that? Because Cain and Abel was sacrificing in Genesis 4. And we know that a priesthood, doesn't start until age 30. And we know that at that time Abel was slain. But if you look at Genesis 5, and Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. So I'm just looking at the approximation of things. If Cain and Abel was sacrificing, and we know that this is outside of the garden, right? They would have been age 30, right? And we know as well in the text that Abel was slain at the time. And then the account in Genesis 5 says that Adam was 130 when he begot a son in his own likeness named Seth. And what else here? Romans 4:19. Abraham is not weak in faith at 100. His body considered dead, and Sarah's womb also. Abraham staggered not at the promise of Yah through unbelief, but was strong in faith. And so this is part of where I'm going to take you. I believe if Adam was 100, then Eve is a type of Sarah, right? So she would have been 90, right? And also this text in Romans 4:19, I am also of the position that Adam was not deceived. Actually, it's not me. Paul says that in 1 Timothy, I think. Paul says Adam was not deceived. Eve was deceived. And so even in this text, Abraham was not weak in faith, you see. And because of his faith, that translated into Sarah's giving birth because he was strong in faith, right? So again, Adam and Eve were like little children. And now do we understand why Matthew 18:3 says, "Assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." So we have been called to have this childlike faith. Why? Why is it? Now, this is where it gets interesting. As you know, if you've seen previous uploads, I'm also under the position that Adam was made on day 3, right? And there's a significance of day 3 all throughout the scriptures, right? On the 3rd day, right? Like just look that up, on the 3rd day, right? And there's plenty of support. But I believe that Adam was made on day 3. And would you believe as well that when it comes to brain development of a child, you will see something about the age 3, something that is interesting of the age 3. So here's the article that I have. It's urbanchildinstitute.org. In the first 3 years, a section of this article says, in the first 3 years, a child's brain has up to twice as many synapses as it will have in adulthood. Okay, so what are synapses? Synapses are the connections made through the dendrites. So look at these connections. Do you see it? Newborn, 1 month, 9 months. And here it says 2 years, but I think they just, it really goes up to 3 years. The 3 years is almost comparable to the synapses as of an adult. Interesting, huh? And you wonder, that's interesting. Does that mean that the 3-year-old is as smart as the adult? No, not necessarily. But you'll see Yahuah's mercy and grace here. And what this tells us, though, that, Yahuah has has equipped this developing child from 0 conception to age 3, has equipped the child with so much dendrites. Because he knows, Yahuah knows, that the child who enters this world has to learn millions, or not millions, but thousands of rules, right? So Yahuah has given the child ability to receive, to collect data in his environment, right? And so what this means is that the development of children at this age, up to 7, up to 12, is critical. It is critical to their brain architecture and their development. Because like here it says, the infant's power of recognition improves dramatically. This coincides with the significant growth in the hippocampus and memories, right? But here's the thing, like the having a child, to train up a child, like the scripture says, to train up a child while they are young, so that when they grow old, they shall not depart from it, right? You see, this is even the Jesuits know this very well. For 400 years, the Jesuits has been saying, give me the child for the first 7 years and I will give you the man. Think about that. The Jesuits knew something. And if you look throughout history, you're going to see dictatorship, leadership always targets the youth. Look at Hitler, look at Obama, right? So, by the time a child is 3 years old, they have, look at this, quadrillion connections. Wow, right? This is why they say that you can easily teach a child from 0 to 3 or 0 to 7 up to 3 languages, and it wouldn't be an issue. It would be so easy. 3 languages. But then past the age 12, like for us, we can't even get grammar correct. We can't even speak properly, right? But so you can see why training a child, like I says here in Proverbs 22, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it, right? So in this abundance of synapses, it is the most essential experiences of period of time for the developing brain. And scientists, Harvard researchers, coins this term called serve and return. So what is serve and return? This is what science terms the importance of brain architecture development during 0 to 7. Okay, serve and return. It works like a game of tennis or a volleyball between the child and its caregiver, right? So the child serves by reaching out for interaction, and that could be through eye contact. The importance of eye contact, I tell you, facial expressions, touch, even sound. A responsive caregiver will return the serve by doing the same thing, by returning the eye contact, speaking back, sharing a laugh, right? Touching. So these back and forth exchanges are the building blocks of children's early brain development. So they help children learn how to control their emotions, cope with stress, learn skills that will serve as a foundation for later development. And I'll show you a picture of a normal 3-year-old child versus a child who has experienced extreme neglect. Do you see the difference in size of this gray matter? So again, my point being is the serve and return is critical the first 3 years of a child's life. And you've seen this picture in the article that I showed you before, right? So what happens, what's interesting is after about 3 years old, so starting from 4 years of age, something happens to these synapses. It's called synaptic pruning. And it starts from 4 years of age, the idea of pruning, and it continues on until adulthood. So what is synaptic pruning? Like these synapses, again, they're connections that are being made. They actually go through a pruning process. I'm sure you're familiar with the pruning process. So what happens is the brain eliminates extra synapses. Synapses are brain structures that allows the neurons to transmit an electrical or chemical signal to another neuron. And this happens to allow for further continued growth in the areas that the child chooses to focus on. So if let's say by age 3, the child is starting to be exposed to, let's say, piano, and at the same time starting to be exposed to basketball, just exposure. Whatever the child chooses to focus on, the continued synapses will continue to grow, right? These tree-like branches will continue to grow. But if the child chooses to not so much put focus on basketball, whatever exposure and synapses he had for basketball is going to slowly dwindle away. That's basically what pruning is. And again, it's a scripture concept, a truth that's declared by John 15:2. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. You see that? So again, this is a natural process that takes place during brain development to allow the child to be able to bear more fruit in whatever the child chooses to focus on, or whatever the parent exposes the child in, right? So here's a little picture of before pruning and after pruning. So here's what happens to our connections, to our synapses, right? By 2 years or 3 years of age, you can see that this amount of connections is the same as one of an adult. But after about 4 to 6 years, you see that the synapses become less, right? So again, this concept of pruning, it really is similar to what plants do. So in plants, and you know this, pruning encourages plants to thrive. So pruning is the process where the shoot tips on a plant encourage branches to compete with each other so that tips both above and below can influence each other's growth. So this allows the strongest branches to grow the most vigorously wherever they may be on the plant. So the point I'm saying is the prime time, if this is the case, if we know that the connection, the number of dendrites and synaptic connections is at its maximum at up to 3 years old, then this is considered the prime time to build a strong brain architecture. And can you imagine if this prime time of raising this child is founded upon love of Yahuah, to teach the child to have a reverence for Yahuah, right? So again, notice the connections and how it reduces, right? I'm gonna again cite it from this book, The Barren Temple and Withered Tree. Okay, cited from this book, they talk about the trees of life because the reason I use the synapses or the dendrites and I kind of tie it to the tree of life because it really does look like trees, like these branches, doesn't it? Right? But look what happens, or according to the apocalypse of Moshe, you know, what they say that after Eve had eaten of the forbidden fruit, the leaves of all the trees, including the tree of life, withered as soon as that happened. And that the only tree that had its leaves stay on were the fig tree, which is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And basically, that's what Adam and Eve used to cover themselves, right? So I show you this picture again. I see that when Adam was in perfect oneness with Yahuah, his trees in his brain looked like this. But after the fall, it withered. And now it looks like the one on your left, just without leaves. And now I look at Psalms 1. I remember Psalms 1 where it says, if you are a tree that's by the river waters, your leaves will not wither, right? So in other words, this is because of the fall, right? On the left is post-fall, but Yahuah is in process of restoring us back to Eden, where the trees in our mind will look like this once again, full of leaves. Okay, so Adam and Eve, again, going back to my point, I point all of that out because I want to make the connection. Adam and Eve were little children in their brain and mind capacity, right? And Yahweh is just, he is perfect. And, you know, and just as he instructs us to train up a child so that when he, you know, it's just as, you know, he shows through brain development of a child how critical it is to invest and to nurture the child in love, right? And equip the child to be the best that they can be. So I believe that Adam and Eve, before the fall, before the decision, before the test, they were enveloped in perfect love. The scripture says we love him because he first loved us. So Yahuwah enveloped them with love, nurtured them, demonstrated his love to them. And in the garden, Yahuwah's what he really was doing was perfecting his love towards them. He was in process of doing that. Well, actually, I believe so. He was perfecting his love towards them, but in order for love to be perfect, it needs to be returned, correct? Because if not, then it wouldn't be genuine love. It would be imposed or robotic. But this was what Yahuah was doing in the garden. He was perfecting his love towards them. And he wants to see if Adam and Eve would love him in return. And this is why I showed you the earlier video, because you see how the memories that Adam and Eve had, they had this perfect dendrites, right? As a 3-year-old would, a lot of these connections. And then the signal that came from the serpent, touching on the 5 senses of Eve, it really affected her. And she was presented to have a choice. Does she choose? What does she choose? Love or to disobey what Yahuah's instructions were? And based on this, created an action potential, right? Does she choose to heed the voice of the serpent, or does she obey the one who nurtured her in love? And by her free choice, the electrical signals that ended up becoming the choice impacted the rest of the neurons that surrounded this neuron. So in other words, whatever the choice that she made impacted the entire world as we know it. So why do I say that Yahuah was in process of perfecting his love towards them? 1 John 2:5 says, whoever keeps his word, you see that? Yahuah wanted to see if Eve would obey. Truly, the love of Yahuah is perfected in him. So Yahuah's, I would say, finishing touch maybe, because Yahuah is merciful, and he would have taught, if there's anyone that can nurture a child perfectly, it would be Yahuah, right? So, but there's this thing called relationship that he wants from us. So in order for this love to be perfect, he wants to see if we will return this love to him. And how do we do that? We do that through keeping his word, trusting him, that he knows what he's talking about. And he demonstrates that to us through his love for us, right? So Yahuah was teaching them. He taught them when he walked with them in the cool of the day. Just look how perfect that is. And, he cannot break his own law. So Deuteronomy 6:7 says, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. It's talking about the Torah. And shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, when you walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And then look at this, verse 13 of this same Deuteronomy 6:7 goes on and says, so that you shall reverence Yahuah your Elohim and serve him, and shall take oaths in his name. So how does Yahuah see if his love is perfected in them? How? Well, verse 13 says, to see if they will reverence him. They will reverence Yahuah their Elohim. Reverence and godly fear of Yahuah is a requirement to be in the kingdom of Yahuah, right? That is how, if you were a rebellious child, why would you be in the kingdom? And we know that that's not the case. If you go to Revelation, you're going to see that, and the idolaters, those who are, the unclean, they're all outside of the kingdom of Yahuah, right? Why? Proverbs 16:6 says, and by the fear of Yahuah, one departs from evil. So when we reverence Yahuah, we depart from evil. We don't even consider it. We don't even choose. Exodus 20:20. And Moshe said to the people, do not fear, for Yahuah has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. So Yahuah was really testing Eve to see if she has a reverence for him, right? And that is by doing that, by obeying, by having a reverence of Yahuah, you will not choose evil. And then that's what Exodus 20:20 says, that you may not sin. So we know that Eve failed, right? That Eve has not responded back has not returned the love of Yahuah. And she failed that because she she listened to the creature as opposed to the creator, right? So Deuteronomy 13:4 says, you shall walk after Yahuah your Elohim in fear him, or reverence him, and keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold fast. Another scripture, Deuteronomy 31:12. Gather the people together, men and women and little ones, and the stranger who is within your gates, that they may hear and that they may learn to reverence Yahuah your Elohim and carefully observe all the words of his law. Deuteronomy 31:13 goes on and says, and that their children who have not known it may hear and learn to reverence Yahuah your Elohim as long as you live in the land which you cross the Jordan to possess. I hope you're seeing what I'm trying to, come across here. Hebrews 12:28 says, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve Yahuah acceptably with reverence and godly fear. See that? So it's like having a reverence for Yahuah is definitely how you know that you are in possession of kingdom, that you are in his kingdom. 1 John 2:5, but whoever keeps his word, truly the love of Yahuah is perfected in him. And why do I keep saying love? Because 1 John 4:18 says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who has fears has not been made perfect in love. So in other words, we don't want to use the word fear because that has a different meaning according to 1 John 4:18. That's why I keep saying reverence. If Yahuwah's purpose was to see if Eve would have a reverence for him, right? That's how it is evident. But it looks like it's not. Well, we know that it's not because Eve, for some reason, well, she failed, but Eve feared. What is the fear that she had? When the serpent planted that doubt in her and say, does Yahuah really say for you not to eat of this fruit? And he says, when you eat of this fruit, you shall become like us, like God. That's what serpent says to her. So Eve had a fear of not being complete or lacking. She didn't trust that she had already received the perfect love from Yahuah. And so she feared herself, if you think about it. She feared that, hey, how come why didn't Yahuah want us to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Is it because he doesn't want us to know something? He's trying to hide from us? Like, what is it? It seems like there is this certain type of knowledge that I can attain, just like the serpent is saying, to know good and evil, right? So let's talk about perfect love. What does perfect love look like? Think about that for a second. I propose to you, I'm going to use a word that has a negative, or it's used in the realm of the governments and where they want to take this one world order kind of thing. But I'm going to use the word singularity, or in other words, oneness, ekadness. Do you know that I see in the scripture perfect love is singularity, oneness with Yahuah? Why do I say that? You know, earlier on it says, when you fear Yahuah, when you have a reverence for Yahuah, you depart from evil. Do you think that that's good enough? I guess it's true. But Yahuah, I believe, is looking for greater than just Eve wanting to choose between good and evil. You know, there's nothing wrong with knowing good and evil. If you think about it, in the word, it says, I'm going to take you there right now because I want to point something out. So if you go to Genesis 3, and we know that this is the account where Eve partook of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And my internet is really slow. But the point I'm saying is, Yahuah, because his love has not been perfected in Eve yet, right? She hasn't shown reverence to Yahuah because she didn't listen. She didn't obey the instructions given to them, right? And the serpent simply says, "Oh, what's wrong with, did Yahuah really, like, did he really mean that you would die when you partake of this?" Right? And then so after, going through all that, and she partakes of the fruit, look at what verse 22 says, Genesis 3:22. It says, "Then Yahuwah Elohim said, Behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil." So what I'm asking is there something particularly wrong with having to know good and evil? I don't think so. Because Yahuwah is saying, what is wrong with being like Yahuwah? Think about it. Behold, the man has become like one of us. So what is wrong with knowing good and evil? If you ask this question, in fact, that is what Torah is, isn't it? Torah is so that you would know what is good and what is evil. Actually, let me rephrase that. Sorry. That is what the book of the law is about. The book of the law was put in there, was imposed by Yahuwah because um, they they broke the contract that Yahuwah presented to them, the marriage contract. So as opposed to having the book of covenant, the book of the law was imposed to them. So the book of the law, it basically says, if you choose life, if you choose good, you will have blessings. If you choose death or evil, you will get curses. But then a lot of people don't see that, you know what? Even that is a prosthesis. It was given to them as a temporary solution to keep them alive. Because even when the children of Israelites, when they chose evil, the fact that they're getting cursed is a wake-up call for them to go back on track. So even in that, Yahuwah is love. Everything that he does is founded upon love. Okay? So the point is there something wrong with knowing good and evil? No, because the scripture says, man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, right? But where it is a mistake, where it is sin, is because Eve, this was a test, Eve partook of that good and evil without having been perfected in love yet. So she's not had the reverence for Yahuwah. I don't know if you're tracking with me, but my point is, If you don't have the fear or the reverence for Yahuah, and you are presented with options of good and evil, or let's call this duality. Remember, perfect love is singularity, and now the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is options, duality, right? What happens is if you are given options and you don't have a reverence to Yahuah, and you are not perfected in his love, you will gravitate towards evil, is my point. Yahuah doesn't want you to choose between good and evil. He wants you to choose him and him alone, despite of what is good and evil. That's why the tree of life, and this is another story I'm going to get into, but that's why Eve, it was veiled to her. She didn't really see the tree of life. If you read the text carefully, let's go back there. If you read the text carefully, right? First of all, where's the location of this tree? How can the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil be in the midst of the garden? Or let's say center of the garden, right? Genesis 2 says I'm going to show you this. Genesis 2, I mean, you can go to Genesis 2 and see that in the midst of the garden, or in the center of the garden, there lies the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So how can be two trees be in the center? So my point is, Eve, he says, she didn't have she didn't have visual, or she didn't see the tree of life. She only saw the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Anyway, I just want to point that to your attention, because we're going to get there, okay? When we get there, because I want to point something out to you. Why is it, again, I have a question here. Genesis 3:22 says, then Yahuwah Elohim said, behold, the man has become like one of us, to know good and evil. And then he says, you know what? Lest he take from the tree of life, right? He says, lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. And we all know that this is, again, Yahweh's grace and mercy, that he doesn't want Eve and Adam to partake from the tree of life and they can stay in that state forever. Who is an example of that? Who? The example of that is a Satan. A Satan was, according to Isaiah, I think, or Ezekiel, he was perfectly created. In fact, he covered the throne of Yahuwah. And he knows good and evil. But what happened to him? Pride was found in him. So Satan is really, it really is an immortal being, right? So Yahuwah is saying, I don't want them to be immortal based on this condition, just like a Satan is. You see, because the angels, you see, are immortal beings, right? The angels, I mean, compared to Adam and Eve, but the angels, they know good and evil. They were present at creation, but yet a Satan and his minions sinned. You see that? Because pride was found in Satan, right? So Yahuwah was making a point, right? Yahuwah wanted Eve to choose only him, the tree of life, singularity, despite of the presence of good and evil. So the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a test to see if she has, if she will obey Yahuwah. So I see this process of perfecting Yahuah's love in them. It was interrupted, or it was pruned when Eve fell in deception. And we'll take it from there. I will pause and I will continue this next week, Yahuah willing. But I just wanted you to see that there is Yahuah was nurturing Adam and Eve in perfect love. And part of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is to test her, to test Eve, to see if she has reverence for Yahuah. And by that, that is the evidence of love being perfected in her. So, in other words, it's not that Yahuah was giving her a lack or imperfect love. No, it's what makes his love perfect is for Eve to return it to him. And I keep saying Eve. I keep saying Eve because, and I know Adam and Eve both fell, but I keep particularly saying Eve because I believe she was deceived. And Adam had a different purpose. And we'll see that. We'll see if we can cover that next week. But for now, I just wanted to get this off of my, I guess I want to share what's in my heart. And so I have this as a continuation of the tree of life, overcome a promise to those who have an ear, let him hear what the Ruach has to say. What is it? We've been barking on, we've on, to him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of Yahuah. And we will get even more specific about the location of this particular tree. Why do you think Revelation 2:7 was so particular as to the location of this tree? He could have said, it could have said here, I will give to eat of the tree of life, period. But the text particularly says, which is in the midst of the paradise of Yahuah. And there is a reason for that. And we're going to see if we can get to that next Tuesday. And other than that, I thank you for your attention as always. Thank you that, and I trust that this has become a blessing to you as it has been to me. And until next Tuesday, until next time, shalom, shalom.